Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Calev Ben-David. Each week, we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interests here in Israel and in the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Tzedek. Nicole?
Thanks, Calev. Here are top 5 Jewish items of the week. Canadian authorities working with the FBI arrest a Pakistani national and ISIS supporter for planning to carry out a mass shooting attack targeting Jewish New Yorkers during the upcoming high holidays. The U.S. Department of Justice says a Russian-led disinformation campaign aimed at weakening support for Ukraine sought to do so in part by feeding Jewish and Israeli social media sites disinformation depicting Ukraine's government and its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, as neo-Nazis. Some 25,000 worshippers gather at Jerusalem's Western Wall Plaza for a special assembly marking the nightly Selichot service in the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. This year, along with traditional texts, prayers were also recited for the hostages held by Hamas and soldiers serving in Gaza. After CNN reporter Donna Bash's book reading event in Washington, D.C. is disrupted by anti-Israel demonstrators, her colleague, Jake Tapper, says she was specifically targeted for being Jewish, noting her coverage of the Israel-Hamas war is no different than most other news outlets. And Brady Corbett wins the main competition award for Best Director at the Venice Film Festival for The Brutalist, which tells the story of a Jewish architect and Holocaust survivor who finds success in America. Jewish filmmaker Sarah Friedland, who won Best Director of a debut film for A Familiar Touch, dedicates her award to solidarity with the people of Palestine in the face of, quote, Israel's genocide in Gaza. Well, those are your top 5 Jewish items of this week. Back to you, Calev.
Let's turn now to the United States, where the latest polls show a very tight race for the White House between Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris and former Republican President Donald Trump. It's an election cycle where every vote counts, including every Jewish vote, and where U.S. support for Israel's war against Hamas has become a major talking point for both candidates. The Republican-Jewish coalition gathered in Las Vegas last week to hear from Trump and other GOP leaders, hoping that this November they will be able to pick up some of those Jewish votes that traditionally go to the Democrats. Our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim was there and filed this report.
8 years ago, Donald Trump said he and he alone could save America. Here in Las Vegas at the Republican-Jewish Coalition Summit, Trump said he and he alone can save Israel.
You're not going to have an Israel if she becomes president. Israel will no longer exist. When I'm president, we will deport the foreign jihad sympathizers and Hamas supporters from our midst. We don't want them in our midst.
Now, of course, Trump recounted his pro-Israel bona fides, including the development and brokering of the Abraham Accords. Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa had just come back from a Middle East congressional delegation before arriving in Las Vegas. She visited Israel, talked to the Crown Prince, MBS in Saudi Arabia, also went to Egypt, Qatar, and other destinations along the way. I asked her if there's still a hope of advancing those normalization agreements even further between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
All of the affected parties are very far apart right now, but I do feel that there is room for American leadership. We need strong leadership to bring these parties to the table and really talk about what's going on and how to find that path forward. There's going to be a lot of negotiation here, but unfortunately what we see right now is a very weak Biden-Harris administration, and they're sending mixed messages to the Middle East, and it's confusing all of those leaders. They're not sure where their alliances areas are. Is it with Israel? Is it with Iran? So we really don't know, and they don't know. And if they don't know, they will not be able to find a path forward.
Many speakers here at the RJC Summit focused in on the anti-Semitism going on college campuses across the country, with protests supporting Hamas continuing into this semester. Had a chance to speak with Bruce Pearl, the head coach of the Auburn University men's basketball team, about the environment on campuses and his efforts to try to lead the way in a different direction.
Israel's not an issue for the average American, and I'm not hating them on it for that. But right now, Jews in America are being targeted, and it's wrong. And our kids on these college campuses are unsafe, and it's wrong. And something does need to be about that. And I think the balance is this. Look, I'm a teacher, and I'm a coach, and I am a leader. My words don't reflect Auburn, but they do speak for myself. And I just sort of feel a responsibility in the Jewish community. I just sort of look down and say, you know, my grandfather would be proud of me for speaking up. My dad, he'd be proud, but he'd be worried that maybe I'm putting myself in a bad position because all of a sudden you're a pretty big target. Just shut up, coach, and win games. If I don't win big this year and I spent too much time talking about these things, they're going to point to that and say, I should have been out there recruiting and doing some of these things. Look, I've been able to do both my entire career. We're going to do both again this year. God's blessed us far more than we ever deserve, and I will not be silent.
Many of the Republicans gathered here in Vegas this week said they're expecting to get a larger and larger chunk of the American Jewish vote swinging to the Republican Party this election cycle. But of course, old habits die hard. The leaders of the Republican Jewish coalition say they're waiting to see a little bit longer how things play out before they decide where they're going to put the money that they have into key races down the home stretch. Here from Las Vegas at the RJC Summit, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
And joining us in studio is I-24 News senior correspondent Owen Alterman. And Owen, as you heard, the Republicans, thanks to issues like Israel, anti-Semitism, hope that they can get a larger share of the Jewish vote this election. How realistic is that hope?
Look, we've been down this road before, Calev. It feels like every 4 years, the Republican-Jewish coalition and Jewish Republicans come out and make this argument. Yes, they're going to say that post-October 7th and with the outbreak of the war, the situation in college campuses, the general atmosphere, that there's more reason to believe it'll happen this time. On the other hand, as you well know, as a lot of our viewers know, 90 years, that's how long the majority of the American Jewish community has been voting for the Democrats. It's been there that way since Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. Some say even before that, actually, in the 1920s. But at any rate, it's passed from great-grandfather to grandfather to father to son, or great-grandmother to mother to daughter. It's been this way for a long time. These voting habits and the fact that this is part, not just of the worldview of so many American Jews, but part of their identity, I think means that it's going to be very hard, just as it's proven to be hard, Calev, over the last number of decades, to really move people from one side of the aisle to the other.
But of course, there are polls that show a lot of those voters, those Jewish voters, are primarily focusing on domestic issues, such as abortion, for example. But there is a sense, at least the GOP has it, that thanks to the war in Gaza, thanks to the anti-Semitism that we've seen emerging since October 7th and things like the protests on campus, that even American Jewish voters that have never really thought or put that much weight on those issues will be kind of forced in this election to really reckon with them when they go to the polls.
It's a theory, and there's a theory every 4 years about why this time is different. Of course, this time really is different, right? The situation now really is different. But that said, Calev, again, this is an issue of people's core political identity. And those political identities are very, very hard to change. And you said yourself, Calev, that even now, it stands to reason that many, many American Jewish voters are going to vote on domestic issues. To play devil's advocate, there has been a big Republican success story among Jews, and those are Orthodox Jews, who have moved firmly into the Republican column in national elections. We've seen that, and that's a core part of the Republican coalition nationwide, and it seems to only be solidifying. So that's true. But as for the larger community, the majority of the community that's not Orthodox, as you know, the baseline is a 70-30 split. 70% voting for a Democratic candidate, 30% for a Republican candidate. Of course, that fluctuates within a range. So there is a range within Republicans can work with and still be within history. But as for really changing those voting patterns, if you ask me, it's going to take a truly hostile Democratic candidate for president to change that. If you have an Ilhan Omar who runs for president or Rashida Tlaib who runs for president, sure, that would change Jewish voting patterns and maybe dramatically. But Calev, I think it's fair to say we're not there.
All right. We expect to hear quite a bit of this from especially Donald Trump in the coming months. Owen Alterman, thank you for joining us on Jewish World Weekly. Now, there is a specter haunting Europe, the specter of anti-Semitism. Jew hatred has surged on the continent in recent years, especially since October 7th. A recent survey across 13 EU countries shows an astonishing 96% saying they experienced anti-Semitism in their daily lives. Let's take a look at one case. The owner of a kosher restaurant near the French city of Lyon, who has found herself the target of repeated attacks. In this report from Cyril Amar and Natasha Kirchik.
Hateful graffiti, broken windows, and red paint dabbed on the walls. This is what happened to a kosher restaurant in France. According to all indications, another act of anti-Semitic vandalism. This time in the city of Villebon, in the suburbs of Lyon, France's third largest city.
I heard about it this morning, right after I woke up, through social networks. My friend there were pictures that were circulated, and they sent me the pictures, and that's it. Why is there so much hatred? Why do they hate us so much?
The mayor came to the scene to show solidarity with the business owner, saying that, quote, there's no justification for anti-Semitism. But the owner of the restaurant says that since the incident, she's received more and more threats.
They photographed us without our knowledge through the windows of the restaurant and revealed that we show clips from Israel of Israeli music. You know, Israeli songs are beautiful, and you see soldiers singing and dancing. They only shot the videos without sound and said in the pro-Palestinian channels with millions of followers that we were showing Israeli terrorist propaganda.
This is not the first time a kosher restaurant has been targeted in Villebon. In November, less than a month after the outbreak of the war, a pizzeria was spray painted with similar graffiti, the word death next to a Star of David. And there's also another very worrying phenomenon on the streets of Lyon. At night, pro-Palestinian activists change street names honoring Jewish or Israeli figures with those of terrorists or people who have murdered Jews.
Since October 7th, it has gotten worse. I think people are taking advantage of the situation, the conflict in Gaza, and that the consequences of this reach us without us asking for it. We live like the French live. We practice our religion, but at home. We don't need to show ourselves in public. And to get to this point, no, I didn't believe we would get to this point.
The rising anti-Semitism in France has already caused the largest Jewish community in Europe to change its behavior.
We feel like we were hiding, like in the time of our parents, and everything that happened to them. Some people were moved to the mezuzahs, changed their names, not giving their real first name. You know, we are hiding.
And even if the war in Gaza ends someday, Cindy has a hard time seeing a secure future for the Jews of France.
We are considering leaving. Unfortunately for us Jews, I think the whole world, only Israel can accept us and protect us as much as possible. But we're thinking of leaving, mainly for our children.
Now let's move from France across the Channel to the United Kingdom. There, something as simple as starting a new bus line between London neighborhoods can illustrate the growing and pervasive influence of anti-Semitism. Laura Celia explains how in this report.
The North London neighbourhoods of Golders Green and Stamford Hill sit 11 kilometres from each other. But despite the distance, the two have much in common. Both have large Orthodox Jewish communities, and for years, community leaders have been asking that they be connected via an express city bus line.
A lot of families live in both parts of London, and also a lot of business activity as well that relates to the community. So it was always a pity that there wasn't a direct bus route, that you had to change Finsbury Park, which was not that convenient.
Now the London municipality has finally agreed to establish that line. headline in reaction to the surge of anti-Semitism since October 7th.
A big rise in anti-Semitism, but also people feeling scared. I don't want any Londoner to be scared to leave their homes because they're worried about public transport.
So is this an admission that then parts of London aren't safe for sections of London?
I think we've got to recognise the fear that Londoners feel who are Jewish.
Golders Green sits in the London borough of Barnet, which, according to the Metropolitan Police, was the site of 390 out of 2,000 anti-Semitic hate crimes committed in the city over the past 9 months. Finsbury Park is home to the UK's largest mosque, and last December, a Jewish man wearing a yarmulke was waiting for a bus when he was attacked by an assailant who shouted, "Kill the Jew."
It's a fear, really, it's an apprehension of that. It's feeling insecure and unsafe.
The new 310 line between Golders Green and Stamford Hill eliminates the changeover at Finsbury Park, providing a more secure, direct route between the Jewish communities. It's being given a trial run of a year, its continuation dependent on the amount of travellers it attracts.
It's really important that we see how people change their travel habits, and if we can make the route a success because people get out of their cars and we encourage sustainable transport, then it will be great for everybody.
The Jewish history of Porto, also known as Oporto, Portugal's second largest city, goes back over 1,000 years. Jews built a thriving and prosperous community there until the expulsion of all Jews from Portugal in 1496. A century ago, a small community reestablished itself, and over the past decade, Porto's Jewish population has grown to over 1,000 thanks to the government's policy of allowing foreign Jews who can trace their roots back to Portugal to obtain citizenship. Now Porto's Jewish community is making history again by becoming the first ever to declare that the Jewish Agency, the organization that oversees Israel's relationship with the diaspora, will become the legal heir to the community's assets if it should officially dissolve itself in the future. And those assets are considerable, including the magnificent Kaduri Makor Chaim Synagogue, Porto's Jewish Museum, and its Jewish Cemetery. Well, joining us now from Portugal is Michael Rothwell, director of Porto's Jewish and Holocaust Museums. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We should explain, it's not a new decision. The process was actually started a couple of years ago. It's not a reaction to October 7th. So why did the community decide to make this move, making the Jewish Agency the legal heir to its assets?
Good afternoon, Calev. It's a pleasure to speak to you. You're quite right. The decision was made in 2021, and it's being made more public now because of the rise in anti-Semitism. And it seems to us it's an important moment to publicize what we've done. It takes on a particular significance now in the light of the anti-Semitism that's on the rise since 10th of October.
Right. There is a sort of irony here because Porto, I would almost say famously, is one of those few Jewish communities that's seen its Jewish population increase in recent years. So I wonder why the thinking is even there, even though it's not overall great numbers, but why even the thinking there that this might, this situation might become necessary?
That's a very good question. So, as you know, this increase in the Jewish population it follows the complete absence of Jewish population in Portugal for centuries. Due to the expulsion and Inquisition. And people might think that's a thing of the past. But, you know, if you look at developments today, particularly in the 21st century, you see throwbacks to the past, you see developments which you thought would never happen again. And the fact is that anti-Semitism is always there with us in the background. Even in Portugal, there is latent anti-Semitism, and taking a view of the broad sweep of history, we think just because things might seem safer now, you never know what the future is going to bring. Just as the Germans back in Germany in the 20s never could have imagined what was going to face them a decade or two later. You know, all associations have to have provisions for what happens if the association is extinguished, and our provisions initially were in the statutes that our assets would go to the nearest Jewish community. But as I say, taking a look at the broad sweep of history, it seemed to us much more appropriate to contemplate the Jewish agency as an agency which is all over the world, which, as you say, looks after the matter of the diaspora, has been around since 1929, and hopefully will be around for a lot longer.
Right. Now, Michael, if you travel through much of Europe, unfortunately, you do see museums and synagogues and communities in areas where there is no longer any Jewish community. I wonder what the reaction there is in Portugal. For example, locally or in the population or the government, to leave it to an agency which is based in Israel, which I guess could transfer some of those assets if it had any reason to do so in the future.
Well, you're quite right when you refer to the fact that places in Europe no longer have Jewish communities, and the fact that our communities is on the rise. It's an increasing, thriving community, and obviously we hope and believe that that trend will continue, and will continue for a long time. So the scenario that we've made provision for in our statutes is one that we hope will never happen. Okay, so it's just a clause that has to be there, that we leave our assets to somebody, and as I say, in the broad sweep of history, that would seem to me the most appropriate beneficiary of the Jewish agency.
As you say, you hope it never happens. Unfortunately, in the broad sweep of history, if you look at what happened in countries like Portugal and Spain, unfortunately other countries, it is understandable. Michael Rothwell there in the Oporto Jewish and Holocaust Museums, thank you for joining us on Jewish World Weekly.
Thank you, Calev. Thank you.
Now, sports fans who follow European football or soccer know that there are certain clubs that specifically either have Jewish fan bases or associations, most notably London's Tottenham Hotspur or Ajax Amsterdam. And they have often been the target of anti-Semitic crowd chants. Another well-known English club, Leeds United, may be joining that group after signing Israeli superstar Manor Solomon. But actually, the relationship between Leeds United and the Jewish community goes way beyond that, much further than many soccer fans there realize. Our producer and soccer fan Joe Brown has that story.
After a year riddled with injuries, the golden boy of Israeli soccer, Manor Solomon, has signed for English soccer club Leeds United.
In some way, this might be kind of his last chance to pull up his career at 25 after several difficult injuries that he suffered throughout his career. Solomon was one of the biggest promises of Israeli football.
His signing, however, received a mixed reception from fans of the second division side. Whilst many were grateful Leeds signed an exciting winger of Premier League quality, a handful of fans were angered at the signing of an Israeli who is not only Israeli, but also Jewish. But those in the latter group may be surprised to hear that Leeds' connection to the Jewish community is almost as old as the club itself. Solomon is the first Jew to play for Leeds in 90 years, since Les Gaunt, born Leslie Goldberg, played for the club. And it's not just on the pitch where there is a connection.
Leeds United and the Leeds Jewish community have been connected ever since the 1960s, when there were 3 Jewish directors on the Leeds board, and it was a board of about 6 people. So it meant that sort of half the board were Jewish, and this is such a rare thing because in those days, anyway, it was rare. It was very unusual for there to be Jewish directors on the boards of top-flight English clubs.
From the early 70s to the mid-90s, Leeds were under the ownership of Leslie Silver and Manny Cousins, who, alongside legendary manager Don Revie, led the club to multiple trophies.
In our synagogue many, many years ago, when the Jewish chairman of Leeds United's son was having his bar mitzvah in the synagogue, the rabbi at the time stood in the pulpit and turned to Don Revie, who was the Leeds United manager at the time, and says, I get them in the morning in synagogue and you get them in the afternoon in the football stadium.
Leeds has the third largest Jewish community in the UK after London and Manchester, and as Leeds United are the only soccer club in the city, most of the around 7,000 strong Jewish population supports the club. As with many major cities in England, Leeds has been a hub for pro-Palestinian protests in the wake of the Israel-Hamas war, with a spillover of anti-Semitic incidents. The University of Leeds student chaplain was hounded out of the city after he and his family received rape and death threats on top of anti-Semitic graffiti. And the growing rhetoric against Jews across the UK has deeply affected the Leeds Jewish community.
Personally, I've received on a near daily basis, awful hate messages on social media, online, and so on and so forth. Security at our schools, there's more police and more security than ever before. And children, perhaps, who are not so aware of what's been going on, but pick up little bits here and there. There is a fear in children that I haven't seen previously.
No matter how good Manor Solomon will be, nothing will stop anti-Semites from being anti-Semitic. But the reaction Leeds fans have given Solomon already shows a clear disconnect between social media and reality.
The first game that he played, which was at home to Hull, and Leeds won 2-0, and he performed really well. If you went to Ellen Road, you'd find 30-odd thousand Leeds fans cheering him and welcoming him.
And for Leeds' Jewish supporters, signing Israel's star talent brings a sense of pride for the community.
I can picture more service perhaps at half-time taking place. Maybe prayers will be answered a little bit more, I don't know.
Well, good luck to Leeds United in the coming football season. That is our program. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Jewish World Weekly here on I-24 News.